Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the actual NIH review process, and then we're going to do like a mock review panel on the entire research plan that builds off of the specific aims page that we looked at lunch. So, all right. So when you go to submit your proposal, and we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at that portal so that it's a little bit more familiar to you, you can actually add an optional form to your application to designate the study section and the institute assignments. So why would you want to do that? Any ideas? That's exactly right. So it allows you to target your application to the institutes that you think would be most interested or that are best aligned. So a couple of reasons why you want to do that. First, an institute can't fund your proposal if you're not assigned to it. Okay, so let me just give you a scenario. So say it's really obvious that that your application's going to be targeted to the Cancer Institute. And so you either don't designate an institution and it just goes there because the NIH will select an institute, or you select the NCI and that's the only institute that you designate. So what can happen is, say your application gets a pretty good score, but it's just outside of the NCI's pay line because their pay line's very competitive. And your program officer is a little bummed because your program officer was excited about your application, and your program officer says, well, you know, NIBIB might be interested in this application because your technology is related to precision medicine, and this particular technology that could be transitioned to be a precision medicine platform that could be used for a lot of different diseases. So, you know, NIBIB that has a much better pay line, they might fund this application. If NIBIB is not designated on your proposal, NIBIB will just be like, well, we can't. Even if we're interested, we can't fund that application because you didn't designate us as an institute. So when you decide what institutes you want to designate, just go to the NIH Institutes page, just go through all of the institutes, designate any institute that you think might be interested in your technology. You can also rank them, so you know you have your first, second, and third selection. But that's important because you can't transfer applications between institutes, but only if they're designated in your application. Okay. Again, you do want to align your technology with the mission of the institute. They won't fund it if it's totally outside their mission, no matter what you put on that form. And then, as we've talked a lot about, when you're designating your institute, you want to consider success rates within that institute. So you can see here how the budgets are allocated across institutes. You know, NCI has the most money of all the institutes, but it has one of the worst pay lines. So even though it has a bigger bucket of money, it's actually harder to get an NCI grant than it might be to get into like NHLBI. So NCI pay lines are going to be like 10 or 11%. NHLBI is like 17%. So, you know, if there's a possibility that your application could be targeted, you know, to an institute with a better pay line, you might consider that, and then the next step would be call that program officer and say, does this technology align with the mission of your institute? Okay, so study section selection. As we mentioned before, the topics are pretty broad. The study selections cover pretty broad topic areas, but you can actually go through the study sections on this link. It lists all of the study sections. SBIRs and STTRs are all considered by the same panels. Phase 1, Phase 2, fast tracks, all of these are considered by the same panel. So on a study section panel, you would have a combination of Phase 1s, fast tracks, and Phase 2s. So one thing to know about that is that those panels are going to spend most of that time discussing the fast tracks and the Phase 2s because they're so much bigger. So that's why it's really important that when you write your Phase 1 that you have really good grantsmanship and clarity in your writing, because those reviewers are going to not spend that much time talking about the Phase 1 and perhaps even reviewing them because they're going to want to spend more time on the bigger grants. So the easier you can make for them to get the points across in those grants fastest, the best. Okay, so let me make sure I said everything I wanted to say there. Oh, you can also, as Vicki mentioned, review the rosters of those panels to get an idea of the expertise that are on those different rosters. And then you can designate, similar to the institute, you can designate your study sections in, rank order 1, 2, 3. Okay, so somebody throw out like a technology. It can be like what your company, for instance, is interested in, and then we can kind of play with the idea of like what is if there's more than one institute that it could be targeted to. Anybody? Maybe not something as specific as like a cancer therapeutic, but maybe, does anybody have any ideas for like what could be like a platform technology? CRISPR. So you'd have to have a product in mind, obviously, for an SBIR. But so if I just come back to the example that I gave before, even though it was a precision medicine platform that you basically input patient data, and it had a whole bunch of algorithms that it ran for, and then what it popped out was like a rank-ordered list of like drugs that they thought would be best matched to that patient's genomic profile. Okay, so that kind of a platform technology could technically be leveraged in lots of different disease indications. You just change the input of the data, right? And so in that case, maybe their first indication might be NCI, because that's sort of the data that they have so far. But as I was mentioning before, I don't know where NIBI is on here. Oh, here's a good one. Oh, so NIBIB, National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. So they have a pretty broad mission in terms of like they're interested in basic platform technologies that are going to advance medical science. So it's good to look at that. This is another one to take into consideration, National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. There's lots of things that also fit here that fit in with more like disease-specific areas. So I would just say, go through the institutes one by one, just read the little blurbs that they have online. And then if you're not sure, reach out to the institute program officers to discuss whether they might be interested in your technology, and then designate all relevant ICs in your application. Okay, so let's just say that you're taking your technology and you want to target it to multiple study sections. You have the ability to maybe target your applications to different disease indications, allowing you to target different study sections. So this is a tool that the NIH uses. You can access online. It's called an assisted referral tool. And if you just copy and paste your entire specific aims page in here, and you do like a query, what it will do is it'll tell you, based on the algorithm and the keywording that it does, it'll tell you that you're most likely going to get matched to these study sections. And so what you can do is, if you want your application to be targeted to a specific study section, use this tool to see what the likelihood is that you're going to get targeted the way that you are preferring. And then if you want to go back and sort of like modify the focus of your application to ensure that you get targeted to that panel, you can use this tool to sort of evaluate whether you're a good fit for that panel or whether the NIH is going to consider you a good fit for that panel. Because in some cases you might be taking one application, modifying it in order to have two applications for different indications. So this is a cool tool. Okay, so we always recommend that when people are submitting their grant that they use Assist, which is through ERA Commons, rather than Workspace, although you can use Workspace as well. So, well, let me actually do this slide first really quick. Okay, so I'll just go through this one last time. You're familiar with this now from Vicki, but essentially your registrations for the NIH are going to be ERA Commons. Allow up to 2 weeks for that. You need an entity registration, so that's going to be your signing official account. That's going to be the business entity. And then you also need an ERA Commons for your PI. Then as we mentioned before, it's very easy if the PI has an existing account to just affiliate it, okay? All right, so what I'm going to do now is just launch an application from Assist, just so you can see. Hopefully our passwords work. After all the lecturing we just did about expired passwords. Okay, so this is what happens when you log into, let me expand this, your SO account, is you have all of these different tabs. So over here, this is just our dummy site, so for Eva Garland, and then you want to just make sure that you have an assigned role of SO, signing official. So you can see you have all these tabs up here. The assist tab is what you're going to use to upload and submit your application. Once your application is submitted, you can then use this status tab to follow up on that application when it's being processed, and then you can also use that tab to look at outcomes. So if you go to this assist window, the number you have to initiate your application is the actual solicitation number. So I have one of those also copied here. So this one is, I think this one is for an STTR no clinical trial. So you just copy and paste that here. And once that's done, you've basically now initiated your application. So this application is now open, and it'll autofill certain information about your application, your organization. And then it's a pretty user-friendly site. So it'll tell you your SAM registration details here, if you click on there, but you can see that it's active here. And then you can pre-fill your application from the username, if you have the ERA Commons username for your PI. If you don't, we'll just say Eva Garland, and let's see if it'll allow us to initiate. Oh, okay, enter a project title. So any ideas for a project title? Okay, so development, oopsies, of novel technology for X, whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, so this is the page that I wanted to get to just to kind of show you. It's pretty straightforward. So basically, you're just going to walk through each of these tabs. You're going to fill in all of the information that it asks for. So you populate these tabs. You'll upload all of your documents as PDF forms. This is an STTR. So for an STTR, it assumes you're going to have a subaward because it's required. So you have a separate budget form for the company budget, and then you have your subaward budget that's going to be your partnered budget for your university. Let's see. Oh, I was going to show you, like, if you want to add that institute form, you go over here to add optional form, assignment request form, submit. So then it adds on this extra form at the end, right? And then you can edit this. And so then you can designate first, second, and choice for your institute, first, second, and third choice for your study section. You can also, if you want, identify individuals that you don't want to be on your review panel. If you have like competitors out in the field that you know serve on study sections or something. Any questions about using ERA Commons, or is it pretty clear? Yeah.
I just have a comment. More useful to, well, I think it's useful to look for study section. Most important is to look who's on the panel.
Yeah.
Because, those are the individuals that...
Yeah, so you can pull up the rosters if you link through those and see who's on the panel. They're just for they're rosters from previous panels, so it doesn't tell you exactly who's going to be on the panel that's going to review your application, but it does give you a pretty good idea of like what you can expect.
At least the permanent members should be,
Yeah, certainly there should be some overlap. Okay, cool. Okay, so if you're using grants.gov workspace, you access that through your grants.gov account. So what I want to do next is we're going to go back to that NIH video, and here they're going to walk you through what happens when the NIH receives your application and how it gets routed and assigned, and then reviewed.
Applications come into CSR's receipt and referral area, where referral officers match each application to a study section with the expertise to review it, and to one or more of the NIH institutes or centers that could potentially fund it. Each application is assigned to a scientific review officer, like Vonda Smith and John Bowers, both PhDs and former researchers.
The scientific review officer, the most important thing we do is to recruit reviewers.
These reviewers include preeminent researchers and scientists from around the country. They perform the actual scientific peer review on all funding applications.
This is my job to make sure your application is fairly reviewed. I will recruit the expertise that is needed to cover this application.
If you've got the right people giving you their best advice, that's kind of 9/10 of it.
Once the peer review committee has been recruited, your application will be assigned at least 3 reviewers. Before the meeting, these reviewers will read your application in detail with an eye toward NIH's core criteria, assigning scores for each and providing preliminary overall impact scores of 1 through 9. Reviewers will also consider issues such as the safety and appropriateness of research involving human subjects and vertebrate animals. The 3 reviewers will also write critiques covering review criteria, so when the peer review panel convenes, they're ready to discuss each application in detail.
Okay. So we'll just kind of walk through that. So essentially, once you submit your application, it gets assigned to a study section pretty quickly after that. And so your study section assignment is available a few weeks after submission. So you can pretty quickly see where it's going to get targeted to. So again, as they mentioned, 3 reviewers are assigned to the proposal, and then the top 50% of those proposals will be discussed by the entire panel. So if it falls into the bottom 50%, then you're going to receive a designation of not discussed. You'll still receive reviewers' critiques on those applications. You won't receive a score, and you won't receive a summary of the panel discussion because those applications aren't discussed at the study section. So every reviewer in the panel scores all of the applications that are discussed again at the panel. And then the applications that are discussed receive a summary of the panel in addition to each reviewer's individual review. And then review results are posted in ERA Commons within 3 business days following completion of the review. So once you know your study section, you'll know what study section your application is assigned to, and you'll also know the review dates. You'll know when that panel is meeting. So within 3 days of that meeting, your results will be posted in ERA Commons. So for this, one thing to note is that this is going to get posted in the PI account. So if you are an STTR and your PI is going to be at the university, you just want to make sure that that person is checking the ERA Commons accounts, or they're providing you their credentials to do so, because that's where you're going to find your score. Okay, so then after they put up the score, what they do is they allow the reviewers to go back and modify their reviews. So then a few weeks later, those reviews then are also uploaded to the site. Right, so that happens about a month after the original scores go up. So once you receive your summary statement, you know your score, that's a good time to reach out to the program officer. And pretty much in almost all scenarios, you benefit from that discussion. So let me just give you a couple of examples. So if you get a really strong score, you call your program officer right away and talk about when should I expect a just-in-time request for those documents, and what are my chances of being funded? Do you know the pay lines? They should be able to tell you what your chances are, or they'll be able to tell you when they should know what those pay lines are. If you get a not discussed, or you get a low enough score that you're pretty sure it's not going to be funded, your program officer can still help you interpret your reviewer's comments, and then you can have a discussion about what you would need to do to make that application competitive on a resubmission. So they're useful for that as well. And then finally, the other time where a program officer can really be your advocate is if you get a score that's just outside the pay line, the program officer still has the power to act as an advocate for your application and get it funded if they really like your proposal and they want to see it funded. If you call them right away, if you talk to them about your application, there might be reviewer comments that are because they didn't understand parts of your research plan that you can rebut, or there might be certain things that they're asking for that maybe you have a rebuttal for, maybe you have data for already by the time that application is reviewed. So if your program officer has enough information that he can go back to council and say like, hey, this application's really strong, it was just outside the pay line, but all of the major criticisms of the grant, like this group can address right now. There's a chance that that program officer can bump your application into the funding range. So as they mentioned in that video, they're scoring your application based on 5 major criteria: significance, innovation, team or investigators, environment, and approach. And so they're basing it on this numerical rubric. So scores of 1, 2, 3 are considered high, 4, 5, 6 medium, low, 7, 8, and 9. And then they also give an overall impact score. So the funny thing about the overall impact score is it's not a reflection of the individual scores. It's like each reviewer's like gut feeling about your application. So they'll review on each of these criteria and then they'll just say, well, I think this application is kind of overall a 5 or overall a 3. So even if you might have scores that are a little bit lower in some areas, but maybe you have a really high unmet need or a really high approach, a reviewer may give it a higher impact score because they feel like it's just such an important area, it just really needs this product. Okay, so it just kind of depends. But essentially, you're gonna, in order to be considered competitive, you really kind of need scores that are gonna be clustered at the 1, 2, 3 level across all of these criteria. So your supplemental documents like vertebrate animals, human subjects, authentication of key resources, premise, rigor, and reproducibility. The way that these are sort of like calculated into your score is really just depends on where the reviewer decides that their perception of these documents, where they want to allow their score to reflect that review. So for like most of these, probably that is going to be reflected in your approach score. Premise, rigor, and reproducibility, that's definitely going to be reflected in your approach score. So they're definitely scoreable, but they don't have like their own separate criteria. Reviewers will typically just comment on these items inside of the other sections. So then you take those scores, average them together, multiply by 10 to obtain your overall impact priority scores. And again, generally you want to stay up here pretty high. Yeah. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about submission and review?
Do you actually just call your program officer, or what's the best way to make it in contact?
Usually you want to wait until your summary statement is out and you've reviewed it, and then I usually suggest that you email the program officer and include your application tracking number so they know who you are, and then ask if they're available for a time to chat, and then they'll set up a phone call. You can sometimes just like cold call program officers, but I find it's usually better to let them schedule the call with you, especially around times where they're probably very busy. The other thing, I don't know if it gets mentioned here, when you submit, I don't know if where we put, if this goes anywhere else. I think it must come later. Huh? If we had like tips for how to deal with like errors and warnings. We didn't do that yet, did we? Yeah, I know we have a slide on it somewhere, so I think we just didn't get to it. Okay, so we're going to break again for this fun activity. What we did was that specific Ames page that we provided early on, we've actually also provided a packet for that entire research plan. So you've already kind of been introduced to the main concepts for that proposal, but this is the entire research plan with like a couple things redacted. And then bio sketches for the team. That just kind of includes education and personal statement. We went ahead and removed all the other personal identifying information. And so what we'd like to do is give you guys time to review that entire application. There's also an NIH review template there. That's actually what NIH reviewers get when they're scoring an application. So essentially you provide a score and then you actually can make comments on what you think the strengths and weaknesses are of that particular scoring criteria. And then I think we also gave you a rubric for what those reviewers are actually guided to look for in those sections. So we'll keep the score rubric up here, but what we'd like to do is give you guys some time to review that entire application, and then we're going to split into 2 teams so that Vicki will kind of act as the SRO for one team and I'll act as the SRO for the other, and then we'll kind of walk through what the strengths and the weaknesses are of that application.
Now, you finish the application, you sent it, it was reviewed, you got a great score. What happens next? You're gonna get a notice of award because you guys got an awesome proposal. So, what does the award process look like? Well, that really varies by institute and by agency, you may guess, like everything. Importantly, time is of the essence. So if you got an email from a program officer that is related to your grant, please be responsive. Make sure your accounting system is in place. If you don't have one, make it happen. So how does it work? Well, the program official approves the award of proposal. You will receive an email that says something like notice of intent, okay, which is not a guarantee of an award yet, okay, so notice of intent. The business official will request additional information, that's called just in time, okay? That's the just in time process. So what is this paperwork involved in the just in time? It will involve an SBIR agreement that you will need to fill. There's a financial evaluation that will include a balance sheet and an income statement from your company. You will get asked about other support for the key personnel. What other grants are you on currently? And there will be a lot of information, if applicable, about animal or human subjects approval information. If you're going to be doing animal studies or human subjects research work, let alone a clinical trial. And if you receive a notice of award, that will specify the award amount, the terms, and the conditions. Now again, a very pro tip. Be as responsive as possible during this just-in-time process. If you need more time to obtain any of those requested documents, provide a specific timeline to the NIH officer staff or staff to say that, so they can plan for an adjusted award. And funds are received either on a defined schedule or through a cost reimbursement process. So NIH works through the cost reimbursement process, NSF works differently. So this is what an actual notice of award for NIH looks like. So there's information about, it doesn't work anymore. The grant, there's the name of the PI. Importantly, please take a look at the numbers. Make sure that they are the same numbers that you put in your budget in the grant. Because you will be surprised on how often they make mistakes. So if you see a mistake, let them know.
Even if it's in your favor?
Yes. Even if it's in your favor. Don't be silly. So we talk so much about NIH, but I know that some people are curious about NSF. So before going into grant compliance and how you can manage your money, let me step back maybe for 5-10 minutes and talk briefly about NSF and what the main differences are for people that might be interested in putting an NSF proposal, okay? And if you have more questions, maybe we'll have some time after we're done to discuss them. So NSF, the National Science Foundation, also has an SBIR STTR program. And they fund a wide variety of topics across a lot of technology areas. That includes Internet of Things, education technologies, smart health, robotics, biological technologies, anything you can think of, except drug development. The budgets are strictly limited though. And there's a heavy emphasis on commercialization strategy in the phase one. So from the get-go, NSF wants to make sure that you know how you're going to commercialize your product, what your target market is, who your competitors are. So the main document for the NSF is a project description that's 15 pages long versus a 6-page research plan for an NIH phase one. Okay? So letters, although they say there's a support that they're optional, NSF really puts a lot of reviewers are really going to look at those letters. So they shouldn't be considered optional. And they do have a limit of 3 letters on a phase one and 5 letters on a phase two. And that's the link to their webpage. Now, sort of what are the general objectives? So submission dates for the phase one, there are 2 annual windows. So that's something that NSF changed as of this year. So in the past, they had 2 annual deadlines. Now they have windows. One window between March and June, another window between June and December. And you can submit any time within those windows. I think this window now will end on December 12th. There's no announcement yet on when the first 2020 window will open. Now, another thing that NSF just added this year is this project pitch. So now you cannot just go and submit your full NSF phase one library. You need to do a project pitch first before your full submission. If they invite you, then you can submit your full application. Okay? And you can submit the pitch anytime within that window. And we're going to talk about the pitch in the next slide. Now, the phase two submission dates are set in the award notice of the phase one. So it's not the same as in the window. So you have a funded phase one NSF. In that notice of award for the phase one, you're given 3 potential phase two submission dates. And that's it. Now, NSF only allows 1 proposal per company per cycle. The award amounts are fixed. $225 for the phase one, $750 for the phase two. There's a phase 2B option in NSF. It's a maximum of 5,000 K of match funds that you can request to NSF. The timeline for NSF, around between 1 and 2 months to complete the company registration and also to submit your pitch. Then you'll get the go/no-go decision from the program officer to see if they invite you for the full application. Then let's say 2 months of preparation for the full proposal. You submit the proposal. Now, as you can see, we had this as 5 months of processing and review until the funding decision. Now, this used to be until last year. It would take them around 5 months to come back with that decision. Now, since this year that they started this window thing, I have to say, we had clients that submitted NSF phase one proposal at the end of the first window in June of this year. In the past 3 days, I had a client submit one on June 12th and on June 28th. My first client was rejected in 2 months. My second client today, as I was sitting there, got a request for just in time. So now it seems like this is more like 2 months rather than 5 months. So it seems like this window/project pitch thing is really working for the NSF. The whole idea for them was to use this pitch as a way of sort of filtering out a little bit of the applications that were coming through them, and then trying to sort of speed up this process here of reviewing. And it seems to be working, because in the past this used to take 5 months, and now this has been reduced, at least for some of the companies, to 2 months. Now the topic areas for the NSF overall, they can be found in the webpage, and these are some of the examples that you can see. As you can see, they're very broad, and they actually have another topic area that's basically called other topics. So as you can see, you can basically do anything, again, except for drug development. So going back to the project pitch, you can submit your pitch anytime during those windows. There are 3 possible outcomes for that pitch. And the turnaround usually, the decision from the program officer is around 2 weeks. They can either invite you for the full proposal, they can reject it, or they can say, actually, I want to know a little bit more. So they may have further questions. Now, 2 unique pitches per company currently no are allowed. But the second one, only after the first one was rejected for the full invite. Now, if the pitch is rejected, the same revised pitch can be resubmitted in the next window. Now, go ahead.
Since they have the project pitch, does that mean the program officer is not available to know about your
Yes.
project?
Yes.
Okay, so you can't talk to the program?
Yes, you can.
You can?
Yeah. And they are very receptive to talking to you. Now, what does this project pitch contain? So there are 4 sections. The first one is technology innovation. It's up to 500 words. That's where you describe your innovation. You differentiate yourself from competitors. The second section, another 500 words, is you describe the technical objectives, which are basically your aims, and the challenges. And you explain how the proposed work will help prove that the product is technically feasible. There's another section on market opportunity. This is even shorter, 250 words. You describe the customer profile and the near-term commercial focus. And finally, a brief section, again, 250 words on your company and the team. A little bit of background, the status of your current business, and then you list the team members, including the collaborators and consultants. So all in all, this is more or less 3 word pages. Figures are allowed. You can. We usually never include figures. We try to maximize the text. But you can put figures. And actually, if you look at the webinar, they say that you can also include a link to videos up to 2 or 3 minutes. If you feel like producing a video and talking about your slide in a video, you can do it. To me, that's excellent. Maybe you're more technology. So that's a pitch. If you hear, in the last webinars that we attended, program directors say that on average, 80% of pitches are accepted. So it's basically a mechanism for NSF to sort of get rid of ridiculous things, or proposals that are not really doing research and development, or that do not include really innovative stuff. You read 20%. So once you have your pitch accepted, This is sort of the overall component of a phase one. You have a project summary, which is a one-page overview of the program, the merit and the impact of the proposal. The main document is a project description, as I mentioned. That's 15 pages, so it's considerably longer than your NSF, with your NIH phase one research plan. Basically, because you need to explain a lot about the commercial opportunity. They are biographical sketches, just like NIH, letters of support, again, up to 3. You should not consider them optional. It's very important to include those letters in an NSF proposal. There's a budget justification, a facilities and equipment. If you're going to use animals, there's a document for that. Importantly, NSF does not allow any human subjects. At least, any clinical trial work. So some budget considerations. Equipment is definitely not allowed in a phase one. In the travel section, you need to include travel for a grantee conference, up to $2,000 per person. So NSF makes you go to DC if you are an hour leave. Foreign travel is not permitted. As opposed to NIH, which you can consultant costs are not capped. They are capped for NSF, and the consultant rate is per day is capped at $1,000. Individual costs are different than NIH, so it's limited to 150% of salaries and wages. However, 50% is what we usually collect, 50% of salaries and wages, because that doesn't need to be negotiated or justified. However, if you're going to ask for more than 50% of salaries and wages, then that needs to be negotiated and it's a penny. So the safe rate is 50% of salaries and wages. So make a mental note that this is very different than NIH, which remember was 40% of my rate. So this is very different. NSF also has a profit fee of up to 7%. Any questions about NIH? Yes.
I heard with the NSF and STTR, SBIR, they really don't want you to have preliminary data. Is that too long?
No, I mean, they're fine with you having preliminary data. I would say the main difference is that, for sure, NIH really wants to see the preliminary data there. It's not optional. NSF is more lenient. Okay? So NSF, if NSF thinks that your product is really groundbreaking, is willing to let you not have that much preliminary data. That's the only thing. So usually for us, for companies that come to us with a really good idea, innovative idea, but for which they don't have a lot of preliminary data, they may have a prototype, but they haven't done any work to show feasibility or any proof of concept, really. But they do have a good prototype and a good rationale, or some very little preliminary data. NSF is really a good candidate. If they have if they have a good business plan, I mean, they need to have an idea of how they're going to commercialize their product. So that is the difference. They're far more lenient in letting you get off with not having rigorous preliminary data or more solid preliminary data.
Does it simulate you as well?
No. No. You need to have, I would say you do really need to have IP protection. Grant award management. So now you need to figure out how to manage the money that you were given. There we are. Okay. Basically, the whole point is that you are given federal money, and you need to be careful because you don't want to go to jail. That is the whole point. So once you're given this federal money, there are three things that you need to keep in mind that you need to do. The first one is that you need to establish a written policies and procedures manual. The second one is that you need to have a project cost accounting system. And the third one is that you need to have an adequate timekeeping. And we're going to go over this briefly. So, for large companies, a policies and procedures manual can have hundreds of pages. Now, usually for small businesses, or 5 people or less, usually 15 to 20 pages manual is more than enough, and that's all you need. Now, what are the components of this manual? Are the ones that are listed here, and I'm just going to say a few words about each of the components. You need first to have some kind of classification for the personnel that are in your company. And assign roles to that personnel, who are the managers, who are the C-level people. Just have some kind of classification and the responsibilities for the key personnel, or the personnel. You need to have some kind of asset management system to deal with the federal funds, and a backup system in place for that system. You need to have a billing system to bill and invoice the government. You need a cost tracking and allowability system. That is what is going to allow you to assign for your project what goes into the red, what goes into the red, what goes into your unallowable. You need some kind of policy to delegate signing authority and review. For instance, in some cases, you may need to have 2 signatures on such transactions and things like that, particularly for major transactions. You are going to have some kind of invention disclosure policy for any kind of invention that happens with federal funds. You're going to have a purchasing policy around who can purchase who, at what level, and whether the person who purchases something is the same person who approves that purchase. You need a record-keeping system. At this point, you can be expected to just keep all your records in a shoebox. In this day and age, you are required to keep up to 7 years of records for tax purposes. So you require some kind of system to keep these records. You need a segregation of duties policies about who is going to do what. And then, very importantly, you need a timekeeping system. Okay? Because everyone who's going to be paid by the grant needs to very accurately keep track of the time. The second thing that I said you needed was a project cost accounting system. And that is something that an accountant who is used to grant compliance can do that for you. Now this is very specific to grants. So instead of a regular accountant, is usually not an expert in it. So you need someone who knows particularly about grant compliance. And these systems allow you to segregate costs by project. So this becomes useful when you have different projects. that allows you to track the reasonableness and allocability of grant-related expenditures, maintain documentation of all your grant-related costs, and it also allows you to establish internal controls. Lastly, you need the adequate timekeeping system. Now, why is this so important? Because the first thing that an auditor will ask you when there's an audit is where is your timekeeping system and where is your policy and procedures manual. Why? Because the first, sort of the number one way that we see fraud happening is that when we get grant money and people do fraud, it's basically it's paying people with grant money and people are not actually working towards the grant. That's the number one way that people do fraud. Now, and how can we prove that people are actually working towards the grant? It's because they're keeping track of their time somehow with an adequate timekeeping system. Okay? Now, this is sometimes really hard for scientists or for people coming from an academic background who are not used to keeping track of their time, okay, on a daily basis. Now, how do we do this? Now, you can do it manually, but it's far more common to do it electronically. We usually recommend timesheets.com. It's really user-friendly. Usually, auditors come, they will interview the employees and ask them, show me your timesheet, show me how you do it, and they make sure that those timesheets are signed by their supervisors. So they really need to be keeping track of that, as it says there. Well,
No, I mean, just.
she's really already very
No, I'm
stressed.
just looking at him and a lot of.
He's also very stressed.
Yeah, doing a lot of this.
Yeah.
His own supervisor then?
Yeah. How do you manage?
Yeah, I have two other people, CSO and treasurer. They are my supervisors, but I go by myself the whole time. Well, we keep track of the time I provide everyone, like the time that I apply to on the ground, These are one thing.
It's very compliant.
Love that.
Yes.
Is there a equivalent, like a QuickBooks for project cost accounting system that's
Yes.
used outside of like getting a CFO or something?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I don't know if it's the normal version, but I think our accountants use QuickBooks plus some other version of something. Yes. Now, I know that I wanted to scare you in particular, but it's not that audits are super common, because it's not that NIH or any agency does the audit themselves. They usually, subcontract that to an outside vendor, so they're not super common, but then they happen. However, for instance, if you do get a FASHA or a directive dispute, or you have a pursuit, if you, in a single year, spend more than $750,000, that would trigger an audit. Yes, now you're interested. If in a single year, you spend more than $750,000, that will trigger an audit.
Is it across multiple grants or just a single?
It could be a single grant, federal money, okay? Now, you will have to pay for that audit.
Why is
Because so,
That's it.
that's it.
It's a fractional, I guess.
Yes, and it could cost you anything between, now, if you have money from the different two types of audits. So if you have money, I think, from only one federal agency, you can have, I think, what is called like a program-specific audit, and that can cost you anything between $12,000 to $15,000. Now, if you have received money from different federal agencies, let's say NIH and NSF, that is a more general audit, and that can cost you $20,000. Yes. Can agree? Keep going? Yes. So that's why when you prepare your budget for your phase 2, if you're doing an NIH phase 2, you can budget in your direct costs and TABA money, and I can talk to you about what TABA is. I was way too complicated for this. In your direct costs, so you can ask money for grant compliance and accounting to cover potential grant compliance, accounting, and audit costs, if you're going to be a part of that. Yes?
I mean, are audits done randomly or independent inspection?
Okay, so what I said before, audits can be done randomly at any time. They're not very common. Okay, they're not common at all. Because NIH or any agency does not have the money, the power, the will to do this, because they need to subcontract another third-party vendor to do it. However, I said, if you spend on a single year $750,000 of federal money or more, that will trigger an audit for sure.
So if you have a $2 million phase 2 over 2 years, you're going to be audited.
Yes. That's why it's so thin, because I know people are finding it too. Keep that in mind.
Also, the audit basically is intrinsic to phase 2.
Kind of. Sometimes, well, there is a way, because even though, let's say phase 2s are, 2.5, sometimes if you're not really spending, $750 a year because your project will spend more than 2 years, and you didn't really get to spend $750 a year, because you're going slower, maybe you just spend $745,000 in year 1, then you won't trigger it. So our accountants are really good at that.
If you spend $1 million the first year and $1 million the second year, is that you get audited twice, or you get audited? Okay.
It's always the first audit.
Oh, now you're much better. Yes.
It's not really a money question, but at the end of, let's say, phase 1, and you decide you're done, and you're not going to do a phase 2, or you get to the end of phase 2, and you're effectively running the system, what kind of reporting do you have to send back to the funding institute as far as giving a summary of what was done?
Yeah, they're final reports. Straightforward. Yeah, they're financial reports as well. I'm not super familiar with them because I don't do grant compliance and accounting, but yes. Okay. Question, well, you have questions for a lot, but I just want to show you 2 things. There's one more slide after this. This is a picture of us. And these are all of us right now. And let me tell you this before I forget. So let me tell you this so you're aware. So we just got a contract with the NIH for this applicant assistance program called the AAP. This is a free 10-week personalized coaching for companies applying for the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, NHLBI, Heart, Lung, Blood, National Institute of Aging, and NIMDS, the Neurological Disease Stroke. So the idea is that these are for first-time NIH phase 1 awardees that will help preparing their proposals. We don't do the writing, but we help them with the proposal, coaching them so they can submit an NIH phase 1 for any of those 4 institutes. Now, the submission, the deadline for this first cycle, for people who want to submit something for January 6th, the deadline is tomorrow, so that is very quick. However, this contract that we have is for the next 5 years. So there will be instances in the next 5 years. So probably you can do it for the April cycle, the September cycle, and for the remaining cycle in the next 5 years. So you can always go to our website to see when the next cycle will open if you cannot make the deadline tomorrow. So the idea is that we will go over basically following our book and help you week by week doing everything that you need to be able to put a complete phase 1 application. You just need to apply to the program, and then NIH will select 60 participants each cycle, and I think maybe 80 in the future each time to give assistance to us. So that's a resource that we want to share with you in case you want. Now, right now it's only limited to these 4 institutes, however. And these are just the links to the institutes that we mentioned today that I wanted to share. So now we don't have more questions. We reach the end.
So are there more companies that provide the assistance program, or is it only through one company by chance?
The AAP program, as far as I know, this is the only one that I think is going on right now. It is only through us. I don't know if there's anything else around for other agencies or for the other institutes. I mean, I have to say, I've been looking at the applications that we have gotten through the website for the program, and a lot of the applications are really matches for our institutes. So I think that a lot of people want to participate, and they want to make a thing that they're relevant for those institutes, but they're not. So hopefully we can tell the NIH, listen, it seems like you should be extending the program to other institutes as well. Of course, it's